I'll be focusing mostly on rationale, a couple of key points and some basics, and then next time I'll be really delving into the techniques. So just really to set us up, when we think about our rationale for cognitive restructuring within the context of addressing psychotic symptoms, a lot of this has to do with a sort of a typical process that we see repeat itself in CBT transdiagnostically. And that is that typically the way that the brain works is that we develop these schemas, these ideas of how the world works and who we are in relation to other people through our early learning experiences. And then these schemas or these core beliefs could be based on what other people have said to us. So oftentimes, we're internalizing messages that we heard about ourselves as children. So if people told us, you're not good at X, then we might start to believe we're not good at X. If they tell us really damaging messages like you're a loser, then we start to form a belief that I really am a loser, I'm worthless, others are better than me, I'll always be this way. And it really informs also the way that we make sense of the things that happen to us, inside us, or around us. So we might form beliefs if we have had a number of adverse events or traumas, that the world is a dangerous place, that others will victimize me, that I'm damaged, that the future is uncertain. And what happens then is that when we go through the world, we do experience information that would actually not support these beliefs. But our brain tends to filter these kinds of things out. And I alluded to this, I think it was last Echo, where I talked about this negative feedback loop, where when we're sort of in this negative affective state, which is usually precipitated by a negative attitude, belief, thought, interpretation, that when we're in that state, we're more likely to attend to negative stimuli, we're more likely to interpret or attribute a negative valence to that stimuli, and we're more likely to encode, that is, remember the negative information, which then, of course, makes us more likely to have negative interpretations. And then that's how we kind of get into this negative feedback loop, which we tend to see in every major psychopathology, including psychotic disorders. So we know that our brain is trying to make sense of a lot of information, but that we don't always get it right, either because we're not attending to things that would contradict our belief system, or because we process it in a different way. And so this cartoon, which was, I don't know whether Scott Waltman, who's a psychologist at University of Pennsylvania, drew this cartoon, but I give credit to him because that's how I came across it. Okay, and so, also we've got sort of the cognitive triad, which Beck initially developed for his model of depression, which says that, people that are in a depressed state have negative views of themselves, things like I'm worthless, I'm no good, I'm undeserving. They have a negative view of the world is a hostile place, it's unrewarding. And a negative view of the future will always be that way. And that these are the things that are really informing our automatic negative thoughts. And we carry these schemas around like, baggage. And so part of the work of a cognitive behavioral therapist is not just to look at the surface level of the kinds of cognitive distortions you're hearing, but really being attuned for patterns in the way that people are talking, and to use those patterns to hone in on how they, what does their cognitive triad look like, and where might that have come from? So in cognitive restructuring, we target unhelpful automatic thoughts because, one, they're the most accessible to us. It's really not immediately apparent always what somebody's core schemas are, although we can have some hypotheses, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But we also target these unhelpful thoughts because these thoughts are what we know are contributing to the unhelpful behaviors, things like withdrawal, acting out, revenge seeking, cutting, drinking, yelling at the voices, engaging in unhealthy relationships. And they also increase painful emotions. And over time, these thinking patterns really contribute to and exacerbate depression, anxiety, psychosis, and functional impairment. So we all, engage in these sort of compensatory strategies to protect ourselves. And so, and that's totally understandable. And I think it's something that we really want to validate with our clients. And, this diagram, I don't know that I would necessarily, if I haven't gone over a sort of hypothesized core beliefs on that bottom box of making sense, maybe I wouldn't start there with the client, but certainly we can start with automatic negative thoughts that the client really already has shared with us that might reflect beliefs about incompetence, which therefore make the person more likely to predict that they will fail at a given task, right? If I think I'm generally an incompetent or even unlucky person, I'm probably not likely to think I'm going to succeed at a new task, which means I'm not going to try very hard at new things, which means I genuinely am less likely to be good at that new thing or to develop competency, which then leads to low levels of achievement in my life across a number of, across a period of time, which of course then is used as evidence about my own incompetence, right? And so the person is very unlikely to engage in new attitudes about themselves or new behaviors. So what we're doing is we're really trying to push somebody, and of course we know we can start off in a number of places when we're trying to initiate change. We can start off with the thoughts, we can start off with the behavior. I wouldn't say there's a wrong way to go, but really what we want to make sure that we're doing a very, very thorough job with is that we're always tying it back with the individual to what does this new information, new behavior, new experience say about them, so that they can start to develop more balanced beliefs about themselves. They can engage then more effectively in cognitive reappraisal. Sorry that box got cut off. And then they're more likely to try new things. I have, the fancy intervention term for that, but really we just want them to try new things to generate new data. And then when they have, a success experience or a partial success experience, that generates new learning, new information that then feeds back into the view about themselves that's hopefully more balanced and more productive. So from the perspective of cognitive theory, just applying this now to psychosis, we know that even though most of us were taught in graduate school that delusions are defined as fixed false beliefs, that delusions are simply misinterpretations that are absolutely modifiable. And so we want to then identify cognitive distortions. What are the unhelpful thinking styles that we are noticing are coming up over and over again? For most of our folks with psychosis, these tend to be jumping to conclusions and emotional reasoning. Those are the most common types of thinking errors that they make. But we all have idiosyncratic thinking styles. I had a client that just was able to identify 6 on the list of cognitive distortions, and I agreed with every single one of them. So we want to help them identify what kinds of ways of thinking are really unhelpful and come up for them frequently. And then we want to use our Socratic questioning to really facilitate this process of guided discovery, where we're on this journey with the client where we're starting to connect some dots, right? We're helping the client start to recognize the link between their experiences and their unhelpful thinking styles, and maybe even where those thinking styles or where those views come from. I think about Seattle, who Brad will be talking about later in our clinic, giving us an update on this client that he just terminated with. And one of the questions that I'm so curious about with Seattle was, who talked to you in this way? You know, the ways that you think about yourself, they're so negative, they're so pejorative, they're so damning. Who in your early life, you know, whose voices were those, or whose voice was that? And then next, the therapist would help them to identify, categorize, evaluate, and modify unhelpful automatic thoughts. And we use home practice to rehearse more consistent, helpful response styles. And that's sometimes it's a kind of fake it till you make it. We want to get them in the habit of doing this new helpful, more adaptive response, even if it's not quite as comfortable as their old response style was. And then over time, the client would be able to identify, categorize, evaluate, and modify their own thoughts in the moment. Notice what's not on this list is challenging the thoughts. We're not challenging, we're not disputing, we're simply evaluating them. That's much more collaborative. Okay, so that's generally our process. In CBT for psychosis, one of the modifications that we make is that we don't just reality test the truth or falsity of a delusion. In fact, we really kind of step away from that perspective, because that assumes that we know what the truth is. And we don't, right? I think there's a lot of humility in CBT for psychosis, where we're asking our clients to open their mind to the possibility that some other things might be going on that they previously discounted or hadn't fully considered. And we need to be prepared to do the same thing. So in that spirit, we're really not disputing the veracity or falsehood of a particular belief. We're really trying to identify how helpful this thought is, and also, what does it mean, right? What purpose does it serve? And really thinking about how, if we can understand the function of a particular belief, how we might then start to undermine the maladaptive core belief. So an example of this is you're doing 5 steps of CR on the belief, I'm the victim. And I would actually even think about doing a pro-con matrix of holding this belief, I'm the victim, because in some ways, this belief, holding on to this belief, is serving a function. And most often it's a protective function, right? We're trying to protect ourselves from being victimized again. But I talk about this in the training a lot when I talk about generational baby carrier, and how, you know, holding the belief that she was populating an entire generation helped her establish herself as the matriarch when her family was not seeing her in that way. And then the other potential target of a CR on a particular belief is, what does the client believe about a certain pattern of behavior? And the function there is really challenging the belief that that behavior is accomplishing what they want it to accomplish. So an example of this is doing a 5 steps of CR on the belief that calling the police will avert terrorism, or telling sister that mom is really an imposter is not actually, like evaluating the effectiveness of that behavior, and the belief that doing that will really change sister's behavior. Okay. So what do we do after we've done a 5 steps of CR? We really want to ask the question, what does it mean that this thought may not be 100% true, right? Because even if we haven't changed the belief, likely through this process of looking at the evidence that supports and the evidence that doesn't, we've probably seen some kind of downgrade in the conviction. And so if I think something is 80% true or 50% true, how does that affect the way that I feel? Maybe it makes me feel more confused. And then how might this affect the client's life, right? What's the difference in living your life, where you believe this at 100% versus where you believe this at 50%? Okay, so we really want to make sure that we're treading sensitively. And I think we do this, and we've talked about this in the training and reinforced this a number of times, that when our style is a Socratic style, when the client, by the time we get to the 5 steps of CR, is used to this dynamic of, exploring things together, asking lots of questions, not really taking something at face value, really trying to get at underlying meanings, then that really kind of paves the road for us in terms of being able to sensitively explore illogical or paralogical beliefs and conclusions. I'm really encouraging the client to just look at a broader range of evidence. We're not necessarily looking for the belief to change right away, and I hope that that provides some relief, because I think sometimes we see that clinicians are reluctant to go into 5 steps of CR because they're worried about making the belief stronger by talking about it, or if it doesn't go the way we want it to go. I would encourage you to really kind of think of this as in a neutral way, like you don't have a dog in this fight, that you're interested in the journey of exploration rather than at the outcome. And Podesky, who's a authority on this Socratic dialogue and the Socratic technique, wrote about this in a piece that I circulate before the training, and we touched on it in the training, and she kind of talks about in this article that sometimes she really doesn't actually know where she's going with a line of questioning, and it really becomes apparent where they go together as the process unfolds. And I think that the same should be true in a cognitive restructuring, a formal cognitive restructuring, because really, if we've done our job, we've helped them look at things in a much more critical lens, and we'll see that over time is a much more generalizable skill than them simply saying, oh yes, I see that was an erroneous belief, and this is a much more accurate belief, right? So we're teaching them the steps to this process, the skill, if you will. And we also know that delusions form typically over a long period of time, and they'll erode over a period of time with practice. And we can affect the strength of the belief through this process of exploration and really helping them to get less locked into a thinking style or a set of beliefs, really giving them a lot more mental flexibility. All right, so this will be a very familiar table to you all. I come back to this table over and over again because it really helps me with the conceptualization of really understanding what is it like to be in this person's shoes, particularly when the beliefs are bizarre. And it can just feel very, very difficult to connect with them. If I know the category of the nature of the belief, then I can make some good hypotheses about how they see themselves, other people, and their future. And so just wanted to bring this resource back into your line of sight. All right, a couple more things, and then we're gonna end for today and save the rest for next time. Cognitive restructuring works best following psychoeducation and normalization, as well as personalized understanding of what exacerbates their psychotic experiences. This is our making sense, right? We've not just done psychoeducation, but we've really personalized that psychoeducation by reviewing their own formulation. Teaching the cognitive model demonstrates that the thoughts about the voices are just that. They're not facts, but they're your brain's best guess about what's going on and how to make sense of that experience. Your approach throughout the treatment is collaborative, inquisitive, and curious. You want to choose thoughts for the 5 steps of CR wisely based on the conceptualization and the individual's problem and goal list. And part of that conceptualization, by the way, is going to be your assessments, right? So looking at the P scale, looking at the BAVQ and thinking, what are they rating as really high level here that is low hanging fruit? And which automatic thoughts relate to core beliefs? And then finally, understanding the fine points of a delusional idea will really significantly enhance the quality of this exploration. So when they say, I feel like a robot that's being controlled, I want to know more about that feeling. I want to know a lot. What do you mean when you say robot? Help me understand it the way that you do. And when you say others are controlling you, who would that be? And when did that start? Because that's how you're going to get a good quality CR, is really understanding the meaning of what they're saying and not assuming that you understand what they're saying.